My name is Eliza Marie Freeman. I'm 72 years old, and I'm that slow-stepping grandma with a sharp memory who's always watering her plants on the porch and telling old stories while the sun sets behind the fields. But today is different. Today, I need to tell something I never thought I'd revisit, a truth the years had buried deep until a forgotten cell phone stirred it all back to life. It happened on an ordinary morning, one of those quiet ones where the smell of fresh coffee mixes with birdsong drifting through the kitchen window. My grandson John had left his phone on the kitchen counter before heading out for school. When it vibrated, I picked it up, thinking it was probably nothing. But I froze. The screen lit up with a recent photo of me, taken at a family lunch, and right beneath it was the name of the caller. Miss Ruth. That name hit me like lightning. Miss Ruth. It was the name my mother used only when she needed to protect us. A made-up name, her secret code in the few moments she dared to reach out for help without revealing what was really going on. And just like that, everything came rushing back. My childhood, our little home, the man who destroyed everything. We grew up in a wooden house on the edge of a small town in rural Georgia. Me, my mom, and my younger brother Tony. Our dad had passed away early, and though life was hard, it was full of warmth. Mom baked sweet potato pies, sang lullabies while she sewed, and turned orange peels into candy. Even with nothing, it felt like we had everything. That is, until one day, a man arrived, my father's older brother, Uncle Gene, who came down from Atlanta to help. He spoke with a calm, deep voice and carried himself like someone used to being respected. To the outside world, he was a retired Army man, dignified, generous. But behind our front door, he was something else entirely, a ghost that crept through our lives, stealing light and joy. After he came, my mother's spark dimmed. Her songs were replaced by silence. Her eyes stayed swollen, though she never said a word, except once at the local store, when I heard her whisper to the cashier, "If anybody ever asks, just say my name's Miss Ruth." Years passed in that rhythm of fear and silence. I, still a little girl, learned to hide bruises under long sleeves, to come up with stories for teachers, to mother Tony like he was my own child. Every time a door creaked, I flinched. Every time someone breathed too loud, my heart jumped. Speaking the truth could have meant disaster. Silence was the only way I knew to keep Tony alive. And me? I faded into the background of my own life. It wasn't until a new neighbor moved in, Mrs. Louise, with her sharp eyes and gentle presence, that something inside me stirred. She started teaching me embroidery, but what she was really stitching back together was my courage. I began to hide messages in the hems of fabric, little cries for help only she might understand. By the time the day of escape finally came, my mother couldn't leave anymore. But Tony and I made it. So when I saw that name, Miss Ruth, on John's phone, the ground dropped out from under me. No one else in the world knew what that name meant. No one but my mother and me. And in that instant I understood. My grandson knew something. Somehow he had found out. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to hear the story I've kept locked away for over 60 years. Today I speak because the time for fear is over, and because sometimes the truth needs a false name just to survive, until someone is finally ready to hear it. If you're still with me, I ask one small favor from the heart. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me keep telling stories like this, stories that lived in silence far too long. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Because this isn't just my story. It's for all the girls who had to survive quietly. And today, I choose to speak. I still remember the smell of our house like it's wrapped in my bones, pine wood and cinnamon, with a little hint of old fabric from Mama's sewing machine. We lived in a small town called Millwood in southern Georgia. Our house sat near the woods, not far from the railroad tracks, where trains would rumble through just past sundown. It was a 2-bedroom, white with green shutters and a screen door that squeaked every time it opened. We didn't have much, But the way Mama filled that house with love, you'd think we were rich. Mama's name was Teresa Freeman. Everyone called her Miss Teresa. She was the kind of woman who could fix a broken radio, cook a meal out of scraps, and hum a gospel tune all at once. Her hands were always busy, sewing patches into clothes, braiding my hair, stirring pots of beans and cornbread. She had this way of making everything feel safe. Mornings smelled like buttered toast and coffee. Evenings were quiet, filled with the sound of crickets and her voice reading from the Bible or singing, softly as she folded laundry. My brother Tony and I shared a room. I was 9, he was 5. He had this crooked smile and the softest curls you've ever seen. We'd make forts out of bed sheets, pretend we were explorers, build castles with shoe boxes and string. He followed me everywhere like a shadow. I was big sister, best friend, protector, and sometimes even second mama. Our world was small, but it was ours. And in it, we felt untouchable. Daddy had died in a work accident when I was just 6. He worked at the lumber mill and got caught in a machine. Mama didn't let us see her cry, but that first night, I woke up and heard her behind the bedroom door, muffling her sobs into her coat. I got up, climbed into her bed, and just held her. After that, it was the 3 of us against the world. Every Saturday morning, we went to Mr. Henry's market in town. Mama would let me carry the cloth bag while she picked up flour, beans, and canned peaches if we had extra pennies. Everyone in town knew us. "Those Freeman kids are sweet as pie," the neighbors would say. Mama held her head high, always polite, but never meek. There was something in her that didn't bend, and I wanted to be just like her. Tony loved to pick wildflowers for Mama. He'd gather dandelions, buttercups, even weeds, and present them like they were roses. She always acted like they were treasures. We'd put them in old jelly jars and line them up on the kitchen sill. That little window was like an altar to our small joys, flowers, sunlight, and a photo of Daddy in his Sunday suit. Our town was quiet, simple. There were potlucks at the church on Sundays, long walks to the general store, and kids playing kickball until the street lights came on. Mama taught me how to shell peas, bake biscuits, and hem skirts. "A woman who can do for herself is a woman who can stand," she'd say. I didn't understand it then, but those words stayed with me. In the summertime, we'd catch fireflies in mason jars. Tony and I would chase them barefoot through the grass, laughing so loud Mama would have to hush us so we wouldn't wake the neighbors. At night, we'd lie in bed, counting stars and listening to the trains in the distance. Mama always said Daddy was the brightest one, watching over us. Inside the house, there were touches of Mama's spirit everywhere. Crocheted doilies on every table, a quilt she made from old clothes that smelled like sunshine and soap, a cross above the front door, and a jar of peppermints for visitors. Even when times were tight, she made sure we had hot meals and clean clothes. I never once felt poor. Once a traveling preacher came through town and stopped by our house. He prayed with Mama and told us she had a light about her. She just smiled and nodded, but I saw the way her hands trembled when he left. She carried so much and still gave us all the best parts of herself. It wasn't until much later that I understood how hard that must have been. One day Tony tripped while playing and scraped his knee. He ran to Mama crying, holding out his leg like it was broken. She scooped him up, kissed the scrape, and said, "Ain't nothing love can't heal." That was her answer to everything. Love and a warm compress. Somehow it worked. Somehow it made us feel invincible. I remember a dress she made for me out of old curtains. I didn't want to wear it at first, but when I walked out and saw the way she looked at me, proud, like I was the prettiest girl in Georgia, I wore it every chance I got. We danced in the living room that night to an old jazz record, barefoot on the wooden floor. At night, Mama would tuck us in, kiss our foreheads, and whisper, "Y'all are my whole world." I close my eyes and try to memorize her voice, the feel of her hand, the smell of her skin, so I could keep her close forever. We didn't know then that time was running out, that the world we knew was about to fall apart. That last summer felt longer than the others. The air was heavy, The kind that stuck to your skin. Mama seemed quieter. She stared out the window more, folded the same shirt twice, sang less. I didn't understand it, but I felt it. Something was coming, something that would change everything. I held Tony's hand tighter without knowing why, and then one day the knock on the door came, and the man who would unravel it all stepped into our home like he belonged there. Mama smiled, but her eyes didn't. I remember that moment with a clarity that still burns, because that was the last day I truly felt like a child. It was early September when everything changed, just as summer was dying and the air began to carry that cool, damp scent of fallen leaves. Mama woke us up that morning without singing, without her usual warm smile. Her voice was low, her touch heavy. "Get dressed, baby," she said. "We've got company coming." Her eyes didn't meet mine. I could tell she'd been crying, but I didn't ask why. I was 9, and even then, I knew that some silences were warnings. The man who showed up just after breakfast was my father's older brother, Uncle Gene. He drove an old brown sedan and wore a stiff army jacket, even though it wasn't cold. He had a firm handshake, a deep voice, and eyes that never softened. He didn't hug Mama, just nodded at her like she was a stranger. And when he looked at Tony and me, it was with the kind of gaze that made me feel like I was being measured, not loved. He said he was there to help, that he was taking a break from Atlanta to help Mama get things in order. "Your husband was my brother," he told her. "It's my duty to make sure his family is taken care of." The way he said it sent a chill through me. It didn't sound like kindness. It sounded like a contract we hadn't signed. The first few days, he stayed quiet, mostly watching Mama, watching us. He moved things in the house, shifted furniture, rearranged the kitchen cabinets. He said it was for efficiency. He criticized the way Mama folded towels, said my handwriting was sloppy, told Tony to stand like a man when he sat with his legs crossed. It wasn't loud or violent, not yet. It was slow, like a creeping fog. One afternoon, while sweeping the front porch, I heard them arguing inside. His voice was hard, clipped. "You're lucky I even showed up. You think you can do this without me?" Mama didn't yell back. I remember that. Just silence, then footsteps. When I peeked through the window, she was sitting on the floor of the kitchen, her hands shaking. That night she said she'd bumped her face on the cabinet door, but I saw the red mark on her cheek. I saw how she winced when she turned her head. The laughter in our house disappeared. No more songs, no more stories. Meals became quiet, tense affairs. Tony started sucking his thumb again. I started biting my nails until they bled. Mama walked like her bones were heavy, her back a little more bent each day. Uncle Gene stayed longer and longer, started sleeping in the front bedroom, the one that used to be Mama's sewing room. One day while walking home from church, Mama stopped suddenly outside the grocery store. She turned to the cashier girl sweeping the sidewalk and whispered, "If anyone asks, my name's Miss Ruth." Then she walked away like nothing happened. But that name, it was like a secret dropped into my pocket. A name not meant for me, but one I never forgot. Weeks passed and Mama became more distant. She stopped going to church, stopped talking on the phone, stopped smiling altogether. If she and Uncle Gene ever spoke in front of us, it was short, sharp, and filled with things they weren't saying. We never had visitors anymore. When I asked why, she said we needed peace, but peace didn't feel like that. Then one morning Mama told me she had to run a quick errand. She didn't say where. She didn't hug us goodbye. She never came back. Uncle Gene told us she needed a break and had gone to stay with a cousin in North Carolina. I didn't believe him. Tony cried for hours. I didn't cry at all. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because something inside me told me I had to stay strong. For him. For me. That night, he moved Mama's things out of her closet, folded them neatly, packed them in boxes, just like that, as if she'd never lived there, as if her warmth could be boxed away. He told us we were his responsibility now, that we'd learn discipline, that we'd grow up the right way. And from that moment forward, Nothing was ever the same. Again, Uncle Gene wasted no time. By the end of that first week without Mama, he had full control of the house, like he'd been waiting for the chance all along. He changed the locks, took the front door key off my school bag, and moved Tony and me into the same bedroom. "Saves on heat," he said. But I knew it was about control. Everything was. What we ate, when we slept, what we wore, even how we walked through the house. Quiet, small, invisible. He made me get up before dawn to start chores. "You ain't here to lounge around," he'd growl. I cooked, cleaned, ironed his shirts, polished his boots. Tony had to help too, even though he was just 5. If we forgot something, if we were too slow, he'd slap the table, throw a cup, or worse, grab you by the collar and shake you so hard your teeth rattled. It wasn't just fear, it was humiliation. Every task became a test, and failure meant punishment. He liked to keep things quiet. No yelling in public, no bruises where they'd show. He was smart, like that. Dangerous smart. Around town, he acted like the perfect guardian. He went to church on Sundays, smiled at neighbors, brought canned goods to the food drive. "Just doing right by my brother's kids," he'd say, patting Tony's head like he was proud. Nobody knew what happened when the door closed. At home, his touch changed. It wasn't just shoves or slaps anymore. He started brushing my hair too slowly, hugging me too long. "You're growing into a young lady," he said once, as his hand lingered at the small of my back. My stomach twisted. I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't know what to do. If I pulled away, he got angry. If I stood still, I felt sick, so I froze. Again and again. He made me sit in his lap to read to him. "Read slow," he'd whisper. "I like the sound of your voice." Sometimes his fingers would move while I read. Not fast, not violent, just enough. Just enough to make me want to crawl out of my skin. I told myself if I didn't move, if I didn't flinch, maybe he'd stop. But he never did. Each time I disappeared a little more inside myself. Tony started having accidents at night, wetting the bed, crying in his sleep. Uncle Gene called him a baby, made him sleep on a towel. "You want me to treat you like a dog?" he yelled once. I cleaned the sheets in secret before he'd wake up. I'd hide the towel, wash it by hand, anything to protect my brother. He was already fading. No more drawings, no more games. He clung to me like I was his whole world. He stripped the house of anything that reminded us of Mama. Her sewing machine disappeared. Her pictures vanished from the walls. Even the peppermint jar was gone. One day he took my doll and threw it into the fireplace. "You don't need baby things no more," he said. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I felt like crying would make it worse, so I watched the fabric burn and stayed quiet. He hated when I wore loose clothes, told me to wear fitted skirts, tucked-in blouses. "You look like a proper young lady now," he'd say, eyeing me. After that, I started wearing my mama's old house dresses, oversized, shapeless, always buttoned to the top. When he noticed, he called me ungrateful, said I was hiding from him. He wasn't wrong. I had to. Eventually, he stopped letting me go to school. Said it was a waste of time. I begged at first. He locked me in my room for a full day. After that, I stopped asking. I read from the Bible when I could, snuck paper scraps from his old notebooks. Anything to keep my mind awake, to remember that a world existed beyond our house. At night, he checked our room, opened the door slowly, stood there watching. Sometimes he'd sit on the edge of my bed, breathing heavy. "You're quiet tonight," he'd whisper. "You know I take care of you, right?" I'd pretend to be asleep, my breath shallow, my body frozen. When he left, I'd turn to face Tony, pull him close, and try to keep my tears from waking him. If I ever stepped out of line, said too little, too much, looked the wrong way, he punished me, made me scrub the floors until my fingers bled, locked me in the pantry without food. "You don't talk unless I say you can." He made me write lines in a notebook over and over. "I am thankful. I am obedient. I am safe." Safe. The word made me sick. One day I said something. Nothing big, just a small joke. to a girl from the church choir. She told her mom, who told someone else. That night, Uncle Gene slammed the door and dragged me into the hallway. "You think it's funny to run your mouth?" he hissed. He shoved me into the coat closet and locked it. I sat there in the dark for hours, knees against my chest, barely breathing. That's when I started hiding food. Matches, a tiny pocket knife, just in case. He made me stop calling him Uncle Gene. "You're old enough now," he said. "Call me Gene." I refused. For that, he broke my favorite comb against the wall and slapped the back of my head. That night I stared at the ceiling and whispered, "Uncle," over and over like a prayer, as if saying it could undo everything he'd taken from me. Tony drew pictures in secret, pictures of monsters with big hands and girls with no mouths. I found them tucked under his mattress. I didn't ask. I didn't have to. I kept them hidden, like evidence of the truth no one else could see. One day I knew someone would have to see it. Then came the day when he stood in the kitchen and said, "Your mama ain't coming back. She left y'all. Couldn't handle the pressure." He grinned as he poured his coffee. "I'm all you got now." Tony cried quietly into his cereal. I just stared at the wall, because deep down, I already knew she wasn't coming back. But I also knew I wasn't going to let him win. Not forever, not completely. I don't remember exactly when I stopped being a little girl. Maybe it was the first time I lied straight to someone's face when they asked if I was okay. Or maybe it was the day I stood at the stove, barefoot, stirring grits while Gene sat at the table reading the paper like everything was normal. I was 10, maybe 11, but I felt 50. There was no room for childhood anymore, only silence, survival, and a tight-lipped kind of strength. I learned to move through the house without making a sound. I memorized every creaky floorboard. I timed Gene's naps so I could clean without waking him. I folded his clothes the way he liked them, served his meals exactly on time, and answered his questions with "Yes, sir," and "No, sir." Anything less meant trouble. I didn't cry. Crying made him mad. He said it was weakness, and I didn't want to give him more reasons to punish me. Tony clung to me like a shadow. He barely spoke above a whisper anymore. He started stuttering when Gene was around. I became his buffer, his shield. I told him stories at night, soft ones about flying away or growing up strong. I held his hand under the covers and promised, over and over, that I wouldn't let anything happen to him. I didn't know how I'd keep that promise, but I had to try. My hands were always hurting, red from bleach water, dry from scrubbing. I had cuts I couldn't explain. I'd burned myself cooking, tripped from exhaustion, but I never complained. Complaining was dangerous. Gene said I should be grateful he was teaching me how to run a proper household. I started wearing long sleeves year-round, even in the Georgia heat, not for modesty, but to cover the bruises. I didn't sleep much. At night, I listened for footsteps. If I heard the creak of his door, I'd hold my breath. I learned to keep my body still even when my heart was pounding like a drum. Sometimes I'd lie there wide awake with Tony's arm draped over me like a little anchor. My body ached constantly, but fear was louder than pain. We stopped going to church. Gene said it was a waste of gas. No more visitors either. He told folks Mama had left us and that he was doing his best. People believed him. He was good at pretending. I wasn't allowed to answer the phone or open the door. When someone knocked, Gene would smooth his shirt, put on his friendly voice, and smile wide, then close the door and turn cold again. Doña Louise, our next-door neighbor, started visiting more. She brought leftover cornbread, old books, fabric scraps. She never asked questions, but her eyes did. She saw me. I think she always did. She started teaching me embroidery on her porch. I'd sit there, needle trembling in my hand, trying to remember what it felt like to be safe. She'd guide my hands gently and say, "A stitch holds more than thread. It holds memory." I didn't know what she meant until I did. I started hiding messages in my stitching, tiny words tucked inside the seams. Help. Safe. Ruth. I didn't know if she noticed, but sometimes she'd squeeze my hand when she took the cloth, and I'd feel a flicker of something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. I began making escape plans in my head. Nothing grand, just small what-ifs. Like, what if I hid a key? What if I kept bread under the bed? I couldn't look in mirrors anymore. I didn't recognize the girl in them. Her eyes were hollow, her back hunched. I started writing letters I'd never send, mostly to Mama. I'm trying, I wrote. I'm keeping Tony safe. I tucked them into old jars behind baseboards under the mattress. They were my truth. In a world built on lies, I needed something real. Jean stopped calling me by my name, started calling me girl, thing, or sometimes baby in a voice that made my skin crawl. I started calling myself Ruth in my own head, not Eliza. Ruth was my mother's code, her armor. If I wore it, maybe I could protect myself too. Tony had nightmares often. He'd wake up screaming, soaked in sweat. I'd hold him close, rock him, whisper the song Mama used to sing. This little light of mine. My voice cracked every time, but I sang anyway. He needed to hear it. I needed to hear it. Even if we were in the dark, I had to believe there was still a little light left in us. Jean started locking the pantry, said I was eating too much. I was all bones by then, my clothes hanging off me, but I still made sure Tony had something. I'd pocket scraps, hide crackers under his pillow. I told him it was a game. Secret snack stash, I'd say, and wink. I couldn't let him know how close we were to losing even the little we had. The day he burned Mama's Bible was the day I stopped hoping she'd come back. He said, "She won't need this where she is." I didn't cry. I waited until he was asleep, crept outside, and buried the charred cover beneath the oak tree where she used to sit. I whispered, "I remember you," into the dirt, and from then on, I kept her alive in my mind. Winter came hard that year. The house was cold, and Jean refused to use the heater more than an hour a day. We huddled under blankets, our breath visible. My hands cracked from the cold. I warmed Tony's socks over the stove while Jean napped. We weren't just surviving the weather. We were surviving a storm inside the walls. I stopped talking out loud, even when I was alone. My voice felt like a stranger. I forgot how it sounded. But in my head, I was always talking, planning, remembering, promising myself, I will get us out. I will not let him break us. Every time I stitched a new word into the cloth for Louise, I felt like I was carving a path out of the dark. She never spoke of them, but one day she handed me a box of old supplies and said softly, "When the time comes, you'll..." No, I didn't ask what she meant. I just nodded, because something deep in my bones believed her. Jean's grip got tighter. The rules got stricter. But I had a secret now. I wasn't scared the way I used to be. Not entirely, because I knew I wasn't alone. Because I was writing my story, stitch by stitch. Because even in silence, I was starting to fight back. It started with a thread, a simple piece of blue embroidery floss. I remember pulling it through the fabric, my hands trembling as I stitched a tiny word inside the hem of a cloth napkin. No, just that. 2 letters, a whisper, a seed. I gave the napkin to Mrs. Louise the next day, acting like it was nothing. She didn't say a word, but when she folded it, her hand lingered. She looked at me just for a moment and nodded. That nod, it changed everything. From that point on, I stitched my truth wherever I could, inside pillowcases, behind the cuffs of dish towels, beneath the seams of handmade dolls. Words like trapped, help, Tony. I knew I couldn't say them out loud, but maybe, just maybe, she could hear me through the fabric. I started walking to her porch more often, always with something new in my hands, and every time she took it gently, like she knew it was a message in a bottle. I also began to watch Jean differently, like a hawk. I studied his patterns, when he drank, when he slept, which doors he locked, which ones he forgot. I learned that he always fell asleep faster after his second glass of whiskey, that he never checked the cellar door, that he was afraid of the dog barking next door. Little things, but important. I was mapping him, and one day I knew I'd use that map to escape. Tony started to speak up again, just a little. He'd whisper questions like, "Do you think Mama misses us?" Or, "Why don't we have birthdays anymore?" I didn't have answers, but I gave him stories instead. I told him Mama was somewhere beautiful, watching over us like the stars, that every time he smiled, she felt it. He'd hold on to those words like lifelines, and so would I. One day I left the back door unlocked, just to see, just to feel what it was like to make a choice for myself. He didn't notice. That gave me power. I did it again the next week. Then I started hiding matches in a can under the porch, crackers in the lining of my coat, a small knife from Mama's old sewing kit slipped into my sock drawer, little pieces of control, my own quiet rebellion. At night, I would lie awake and replay Mrs. Louise's voice in my head. "A stitch holds memory." I'd close my eyes and imagine a different life, one where Tony and I ran through tall grass, barefoot and laughing, one where no one told us when to speak or what to wear, a life where silence wasn't survival. It was just peace. Gene got sloppy. Maybe he thought I was broken. Maybe he believed I was too scared to try anything. But he stopped watching me as closely, started leaving money on the counter, started leaving his keys on the table. I took a key and made a pencil rubbing. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew it was a beginning. I also started singing again, quietly, just a hum. Tony would curl up beside me and listen. I'd hum the lullabies Mama used to sing. He'd fall asleep faster on those nights, his breathing soft and steady. Music became our armor, a sound Gene hated and we needed. One night he told me to shut that noise. I didn't. I just sang lower, but I didn't stop. I looked at myself in the mirror, again, just once, and whispered, "You're still here. Not Eliza, not Ruth, just me, scarred, tired, thin, but still here." I promised that girl in the mirror that I would not let her disappear, that no matter how long it took, I'd find a way out. Mrs. Louise gave me a notebook. No words, just pages. "Write when you're ready," she said. I couldn't bring myself to write at first, but eventually I did, one sentence at a time. He locks the door. "She said her name was Ruth." Tony is scared. Each word made it more real, but also less terrifying. I kept the notebook hidden behind a loose floorboard in our room. That winter I left a doll on Louise's porch. It had a red X stitched into its chest. That night, she left a note in our mailbox. "When you say the word, I'll be ready." I cried quietly for hours, because I realized I didn't just have hope, I had help, and I wasn't going to let either one go. The next morning, Tony came to me with one of his drawings. It was of a girl standing on a hill, holding the hand of a boy, both of them smiling, looking at a house far away. He said, "That's us when we get out." I held that paper to my chest like a prayer, because he still believed, and now I did too. Everything became a signal, a knock on the wall, a scarf tied a certain way, a piece of cloth left on the porch. I was building a language of survival, and I knew with every stitch, every hidden note, every whispered plan, the day would come when I'd use it, when we'd stop surviving and finally start living. It happened on a night that smelled like rain, the kind where the thunder hums low in the distance, and the trees press their shadows against the windows like they're trying to warn you. Gene had been drinking since late afternoon, cheap bourbon that stung the air with every breath. Tony had fallen asleep early, curled up like a question mark under the quilt. I sat by the window pretending to sew, but really I was listening, waiting. I heard his boots before I saw him, heavy steps down the hallway. I froze, needle in midair. Then came the creak of our door. "You still awake?" he asked, voice thick and sticky. I didn't answer. I didn't move. "I saw you talking to that woman again," he muttered. "Think I'm stupid?" My fingers tightened around the fabric in my lap. "I'm going to teach you a little lesson about loyalty," he said, and he stepped inside. But I was already up. I moved fast, not out of panic, but something deeper, something cold and clear. Grabbed the glass oil lamp off the dresser and held it between us. "Don't," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It shook, but it didn't break. He laughed, an ugly, low sound. You think I'm scared of a little girl? But I saw it, just for a second, the flicker in his eyes. Not fear, maybe, but surprise, because for the first time, I said no. He lunged for me, but I moved faster. I threw the lamp, and it shattered against the wall behind him. Glass, flame, and smoke exploding into the room. The fire caught on the old curtains instantly. He cursed, stumbled back, tried to beat it out. I didn't wait. I grabbed Tony from the bed, threw a blanket around him, and ran. Down the stairs, through the kitchen, out the back door, barefoot, breathless, terrified. I ran straight to Mrs. Louise's. I didn't knock. I banged. She opened the door, and when she saw my face, she pulled us inside without a word, wrapped us in towels, held me so tight I thought I might finally fall apart. But I didn't, because I couldn't. Not yet. Not until Tony was safe. She called the pastor, then the school nurse, then the sheriff. By the time they arrived, the fire had gone out. Jean was gone, but he'd left behind everything we needed. My stitched messages, the hidden notebook, the bruises, the silence, finally broken. I didn't speak for hours. I just sat on the floor holding Tony's hand. He didn't ask questions. He just leaned against me and hummed a lullaby under his breath. I think it was Mama's. I don't know how he remembered it. That night I slept without fear for the first time in years, in Louise's guest room under a handmade quilt, with Tony breathing softly beside me. I felt the smallest sliver of something I hadn't dared to feel before. Freedom. It wasn't over. There would be questions, courts, therapists. But the war had turned. The silence had cracked. And through that crack, light began to pour in. I never saw Jean again. The sheriff said he'd skipped town, vanished like the coward he always was. Part of me wanted justice, wanted to see him in handcuffs facing everything he'd done. But a bigger part of me just wanted peace. And that's what we found. Slowly, quietly, one breath at a time. Mrs. Louise became our legal guardian. She moved us to a small house on the other side of town, near the woods, where the wind smelled like pine and freedom. Tony and I shared a room again, but this time it was by choice. He slept better. So did I. Some nights we still clung to each other, but now it wasn't out of fear. It was habit and love. Tony went back to school. He made friends, drew pictures of things that made him smile, dogs, airplanes, stars. I kept every single one. I started writing more, too, poems, letters, memories. I told the truth on paper until the weight of it started to lift. Some days I still felt haunted, but I also felt strong and free and real. I never told many people the full story. Some wouldn't understand. Some didn't need to. But I told enough. I spoke in court when I had to. I sat through interviews with quiet courage. And when it was all over, I chose a new name for myself. Not Eliza, not Ruth, just me. A girl who survived, a woman who endured. Years passed. I grew up, got married, had children, and now I'm a grandmother. Slow-stepping, flower-watering, story-sharing. My grandson John is the one who brought this all back. That name on his phone, Miss Ruth, wasn't just a ghost. It was a signal, a reminder that the past never stays buried forever. But maybe it doesn't have to. I asked him about it eventually. He said he found a letter in an old box at Mrs. Louise's house after she passed. One of mine. He didn't read it all, just enough to know there was more to my story. And when he called that contact Miss Ruth, he said, I thought maybe that was someone important. He was right. So now I'm telling you, because somewhere a girl is surviving in silence right now, waiting for a name, a hand, a light. And maybe this story is it. Maybe my voice can reach her the way Mrs. Louise's eyes reached me. Maybe she'll see herself in these words and know she's not alone. She never was. Thank you for listening. If this story touched something in you, please like, subscribe, and share it. That helps these stories find the people who need them most. And tell me in the comments, what did this story make you feel? I'm listening, just like someone once listened to me.